So, starting off with in the ways the pandemic altered intensive mothering, according to Limenick. Um, it's a cultural ideology where mothers are expected to put their children's needs above themselves and other things going on in the world. It can be tiring emotionally, exhausting, and financially costly, and it's a lot of work that requires mothers to be primary caregivers to their children's lives. With the pandemic, with COVID 19, the stress disrupted the everyday routines, being that the schools, daycares, and other resources outside of the house were unavailable. Um, Mothers had to take on a big role at home, acting as teachers, counselors, and caregivers on top of their jobs, career, and taking on even more unpaid labor. Being that everyone was on lockdown during this period, most fathers were still present in the household, but with societal norms, mothers ended up carrying the extra work, and the term intensive fathering isn't used because caregiving is still culturally coded as women's responsibility. Fathers may help, but their labors often seem as optional or praised even when they're simply being a present father, whereas mothers are judged if they fail or make caregiving expectations. It's discussed in the text that the pandemic put extra demands on mothers, which is crucial for backing up the statements of how fragile and supportive the U.S. caregiving systems are. Being that schools closed down, mothers had to balance their career with supervising remote learning or helping to teach their kids more often, themselves having to make sacrifices for their career in order to aid their child. With women, I lost my place. The women that was talked about in the text, she relied on schools for childcare, but once it wasn't an option during this period. She experienced exhaustion and invisibility, being that society just automatically expected mothers to self-sacrifice without any institutional backing. Um, there's the view that mothers are the one that's responsible for their child's needs, and fathers are expected to provide for the household or be absent while the mothers are taking on the child care roles and reinforcing these pressure of these gender norms. Um, which is why intensive fathering isn't really acknowledged the same, because they're not expected to self-sacrifice as much as women are. I remember during this time, both in media and in data reports that happened later on, that American women left the labor force during the pandemic, and it was called a she-cession. Uh, it dropped to its lowest rate since the 80s, and mothers of school-age children were most likely to reduce their hours and quit their jobs because they were expected to manage remote schooling at home. Fathers, on the other hand, were less likely to exit the workforce, and in some cases even increased paid work hours. Working from home also became more normalized and led to promotions, flexibility with jobs, particularly for men. Many news reports highlighted mothers burning out while balancing Zoom, school, cooking, careers, managing everything else on lockdown, but under stories with fathers taking on equal responsibility. Body monitoring is a term for body surveillance, and this means the habitual practice of constantly scrutinizing and managing one's physical appearance, often as a result of internalized objectification for black women. This surveillance is not about appearance only, but it also ties to radicalized and gendered stereotypes, adjusting their hair, clothing, posture, even speech in order to accommodate for how others may perceive them. Their bodies are hyper visible and marked by social stereotypes. One of these, for example, is like the Jezebel archetype. Unlike white women who may experience objectification, it is detached from racial history, where black women's body monitoring is intensified by also being affected by race, gender, and sexuality. The constant scrutiny affects their ability to move in public spaces, as their bodies have always been interpreted through a societal lens. In the text, Stanton mentions that body surveillance is a behavioral manifestation of self-objectification, and moderates the relationship to an experience of I lost my place again. Moving on to depressive symptoms, it's more common with black women, although black women engage in body surveillance less frequently than white women but they do have a significant impact on their mental health. The heightened vulnerability is linked to the intersection of racial and gender-based objectification. Body surveillance amplifies the psychological toll of microaggressions and stereotypes, leaving women more prone to depression in comparison to men. Stanton also emphasizes that black women's bodies are subjected to radicalized ideals, such as what was labeled as slim, thick ideal, which forces them into contradictory expectations. It's definitely discussed, especially in the workplace, where black women are judged for their professional contributions, for their hair, clothing, and body shape, or disproportionately target black women wearing their natural hair protective styles like braids. It forces them to monitor and manage their appearance constantly, often straightening their hair, altering their clothing to avoid being stereotyped as unprofessional, alluding to assimilation. The body monitoring undermines anonymity, unlike white women who blend into what is considered dominant beauty. What is considered dominant beauty? Norms. There was the Crown Act, which prevents workplace and school discrimination based on hair texture and style. Then moving on to Erickson. Emotional labor is a term that encompasses the active management of emotions and relationships, whether it's in the workplace, in the household, and involves comforting, listening, validating feelings and emotions, maintaining harmony within a group of people. It's something that isn't physically seen, but still is emotional labor, and it's not recognized as often, and it's seen as a woman's role as part of that femininity and nurture role, in order to maintain that harmony and that kind of thing. In the text, Erickson's analysis emotional work is distinct enough of the invisible form of family labor that it plays a critical role in sustaining relationships. Women tend to do more emotional work because it affirms with their gender identity, and when men give emotional labor, it is seen more as instrumental or protective rather than in a nurturing sense. It is excluded from regular household labor models with time constraints or resources. It's undervalued and overlooked, and it's disproportionately put on women. I myself have been understand this, whether it's friends, acquaintances, or just people in general. There's an expectation for me as a woman to just sit and listen to them, especially more often for men, because they automatically have those gender norm expectations in place, I guess subconsciously in their head, even when having a regular conversation. There's also the expectation to not speak up during certain times, to be more listening, also to sugarcoat responses or put things in a light, soft tone manner when talking with people. I get this even sometimes with female friendships. It affects the way how I speak, act, listen, and engage in conversations with others. I've had someone tell me before that I was mean and cold and was name called after I just gave a very blank statement about how the way I was treated with someone, and because I didn't say it soft-heartedly or sugar-coated in a way that was nurturing, I said it directly, and therefore it gave into that perception, I guess. Women who speak their mind with less of that sugarcoating type of tone are often seen as angry or aggressive, and it further dives into those gendered stereotypes where women are expected to behave and talk and act a certain way in order to appease their environment and the people they're surrounded by. Moving on to the Boston Marathon, she used her initials. That way people wouldn't see immediately that she was a woman. After they physically saw that she was a woman running on the course. She had officials run after her and try to forcibly remove her, take off her like bib so she couldn't run, all that kind of stuff, which was important for the athletic progression. And then gendered expectations are imposed. It's women should be caregivers, men should be emotionally stoic, and it ends up just manifesting in media, family life, education, workplaces. Women are expected to prioritize nurturing, beauty, and household responsibilities. Men are expected to be providers, protectors, and unemotional in order to feel natural, but they are cultural scripts reproduced daily through gender performance, is what we imagine. When these assumptions are removed, the possibilities could be endless, because then you wouldn't have those rigid norms of masculinity and femininity. In the text, the liminic one, it mentions that with the pandemic and intensive mothering, like the homeschooling I mentioned, the women's job is more than the father's, or the expectations are more. Erickson mentions the emotional labor of the responsibility for women to maintain harmony, caring for others, soothing conflict. Switzer's experience is changed that women are physically fragile and unsuited for endurance. And then there's change present now and more conversations about how these gender expectations are modified. Companies offer paid paternity leave. They are questioning and disrupting the traditional belief that only women should stay home and care for children. There's a large recognition of women in STEM and sports, as well as media representation, diversifying portrayals in both men and women. A lot of those different things could change.